All right, let's get into it. Inside every single one of us, there's this incredible, complex mystery that's always unfolding. And when things go wrong, when we get sick, who's the one investigating the crime scene? Well, today, we're cracking open the case file on pathology. It's the ultimate detective story, and it's happening inside our very own bodies.
I mean, have you ever really stopped to think about it? We feel the symptoms, right? The fever, the cough, the pain. But what's the real story happening down at the microscopic level? What are the clues? Who are the culprits? And what are the consequences?
And that's exactly where our lead detective comes in. Pathology. It's the science that puts on the trench coat, grabs the magnifying glass, and gets to the bottom of what's really going on with our cells. It is, quite literally, the study of disease itself.
Okay, so every good detective story has to start with a list of suspects. In our investigation, who are the culprits? Who is responsible for causing all this trouble in the first place?
While the lineup is pretty broad, as you can imagine, you've got your infections, these microscopic invaders. You've got genetics, codes that can just go a little bit haywire. Then there are environmental factors, toxins we're exposed to. And yeah, even our own lifestyle choices can be a suspect.
For this particular case, though, we're going to zoom in on some of the most notorious and, frankly, most wanted criminals out there: infectious agents. These are the microorganisms that actively break into our bodies just to cause chaos. So let's meet two of the most famous members of this gang: viruses and bacteria. Just look at the difference here. On the left, you have the really intricate structure of a virus, in this case, a coronavirus. And on the right, you can see all the different shapes and forms bacteria can take. They're both microscopic, sure, but their methods for causing trouble, they are worlds apart.
Okay, so this right here is absolutely crucial. Their modus operandi. Think of a virus as a hijacker. It's basically just a little piece of genetic code in a protein shell. It can't do anything by itself. It has to take over one of our cells to survive. A bacterium, on the other hand, is more like a self-sufficient invader. It's a complete, single-celled organism. It can just set up shop and start reproducing all on its own.
So let's break down that hijacking. It's pretty wild. It's kind of like a hostile corporate takeover. First, the virus docks with and enters one of our cells. Then it sheds its disguise, that protein code. Next, it injects its own blueprints, its genetic material, right into the cell's command center. And from that moment on, our poor cell is forced to stop all its normal work and just becomes a factory, churning out thousands of new viruses. And the finale? The cell is usually destroyed in the process, bursting open and releasing this brand new army of viruses.
And wow, here you can see that entire crime scene laid out visually, from the initial approach and the invasion to the hostile takeover of the cell's machinery, and then that explosive escape. It's a perfect visual summary of the whole viral heist.
So we've identified our suspect, and we know their method. Now, let's move on to the crime scene itself and see how this attack actually damages our cells. What's the evidence that gets left behind?
One of the most widespread forms of cellular damage, doesn't matter if it's from an infection or toxins or other stressors, is this phenomenon called oxidative stress. It's a key piece of evidence that our detective, the pathologist, is always on the lookout for.
To really get this, we gotta meet the cast of characters in this little drama. On the left, we have our happy, stable, healthy atom. In the middle, here's our villain, the free radical. It's an unstable molecule, a thief that's missing an electron. And on the right, our hero of the story, the antioxidant, ready to swoop in and save the day.
So here's the heist. That unstable free radical desperately wants another electron. So what does it do? It steals one from a nearby healthy molecule. Could be a strand of your DNA, could be part of your cell membrane. And this theft, this act, it damages the healthy molecule and sets off a chain reaction of cellular chaos. And that's when our hero, the antioxidant, steps in. It generously donates one of its own electrons, which neutralizes the thief and stops the crime spree in its tracks.
But here's where the story takes a twist. It's not just about our bodies being victims. Our cells are incredibly resilient. They don't just sit there and take the damage. Oh no, they fight back. They adapt. This quote really nails the core idea here. Adaptation is a survival strategy. The cell enters this new state where it's not perfectly normal anymore, but it's not technically injured either. It's a state of defense, a way of coping with all that stress. So what do these adaptations actually look like? Well, our cells have a whole playbook of different strategies. They can change their size, either shrinking or growing. They can change their number by just making more of themselves. Or, and this is pretty amazing, they can even change their fundamental type into something tougher, something more resilient to whatever new environment they're in.
Let's start with atrophy. You've definitely heard the phrase, use it or lose it, right? Well, this is it, literally at the cellular level. When a muscle isn't used, like the sedentary arm you see here, its individual cells actually shrink down to conserve energy. They haven't died, they've just downsized for efficiency.
Now, on the flip side, we have growth. Hypertrophy is when the existing cells get bigger. The classic example is a weightlifter's muscles growing in size. But hyperplasia is different. That's when the body actually makes more cells, increasing the total number. Both are just adaptations to some kind of increased demand.
So adaptation sounds pretty good, right? It's a clever survival tactic. But, and this is a big but, what happens when this survival mechanism gets pushed too far? What happens when the adaptation itself becomes the problem?
This is where the plot takes a really dark turn. Sometimes, under constant stress or irritation, the cell's adaptive changes just become chaotic, disorganized. They lose their uniform size, their shape, their nice orderly arrangement. And our detective has a name for this very scary condition, dysplasia. And just look at the evidence on this slide. Compare dysplasia, down at the bottom, to the neat, orderly rows of normal cells, or even the other adaptations. You can just see the chaos. The cells are all different sizes, they're jumbled together, there's no clear structure. This is a huge red flag that things are getting out of control.
And this leads us to the most chilling clue in our entire investigation. Pathologists have a very stark, very clear term for this state of being. Dysplasia is often called pre-cancer.
So what does that actually mean? It means this is the last stop on the line. It is that critical tipping point where a cell's attempt to survive has become so abnormal that, if the stress isn't removed, it can cross that line into uncontrolled growth. And that, my friends, is the very definition of cancer.
It really leaves us with this fascinating and maybe slightly unsettling thought. Our bodies are in a constant state of adaptation, always fighting these little battles we're not even aware of. But this entire detective story, it all hinges on one critical question. Where is that fine line where the instinct for survival becomes the start of something far, far more dangerous?